Hey guys, welcome back. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is a pro-revenge story. My wife Sarah and I had just welcomed our second child in early 2022 and moved into a duplex in a fantastic neighborhood. It even had its own playground. We greeted our neighbors on moving day, mostly younger folks who seemed okay at first glance. The very next day, we found our downstairs neighbors had vanished, leaving their 8-year-old son Jake outside our door with a bag of chips and a hastily scribbled note asking us to watch him while they ran errands. It was a school day, mind you. That was our first call to Child Protective Services. Our other neighbors, Tom and Jerry, yeah, I know, were great. Tom was an elderly guy who repaired bikes as a hobby, and Jerry was a woodworker who often visited to see our kids and sent his grandchildren over to play. They warned us about our upstairs neighbors. Constant traffic in and out, parties every night, nothing but trouble, Tom said one afternoon while tinkering with a bicycle chain. He wasn't exaggerating. It got to the point where we couldn't sleep at night. We had multiple confrontations that escalated into full-blown shouting matches. "Keep it down up there," I'd yell, pounding on the ceiling with a broom. "Mind your own business," they'd shout back, cranking up their music even louder. Our landlord was useless and did nothing to evict them, so I bided my time. One night in late 2022, they came home in their blue Honda Civic and it was wrecked. They must have hit someone and fled. I called the police to report it, figuring they'd at least get in trouble for that. "Hello, police. I'd like to report a possible hit and run. My neighbors just came home with a badly damaged car." Little did I know what I had set in motion. Turns out the guy upstairs, let's call him Derek, had an outstanding warrant for drug trafficking. He was hauled away in handcuffs that night. Derek's girlfriend, Amy, got another visit from Child Protective Services as they'd left Jake home alone again. This wasn't a one-time thing, it happened almost every day. Sarah did some digging and found Amy on Facebook. Using public records, we discovered they owed a rent-to-own company nearly $52,000 in assets. They had skipped out on their previous address with all the furniture, including TVs and a massive sound system. 2 days later, the sheriff showed up with a moving truck to empty their apartment. They took everything. Beds, couches, TVs, the annoying subwoofer system, kitchen set, and even the dressers. Child Protective Services came shortly after and removed Jake from the house. I didn't enjoy seeing him taken away, but they never fed him properly, and he was always in the same tattered clothes. "We can't just stand by and watch," Sarah had said one day. "We need to make sure he has proper meals when we can." Derek went to jail for drug possession. He was out on bail and had hidden drugs in one of the repossessed dressers. Amy ended up in jail for assaulting the sheriff during the repossession. The third roommate, Liz, actually had a happy ending. After losing custody of Jake, she went through several rehabilitation programs to clean up her act and started working to provide for her son. I ran into Liz at a grocery store in early 2024. She approached me with a smile and said, "Hey, I just wanted to thank you for what you did. It was the wake-up call I needed." "I'm glad things worked out for you and Jake," I replied, genuinely happy for her. In the end, I got my revenge on the drug dealer and his girlfriend and thankfully helped someone get on the right path. The next one is an entitled people story. I never thought I'd be in a situation where I'd have to fight for my own parking spot, but here I am. My name's Sarah and I'm a single mom with 2 kids, working my butt off to make ends meet. We live in this apartment complex that's not fancy, but it's all we can afford right now. One of the perks is that each apartment gets 1 reserved parking spot. It's not much, but when you're juggling groceries and 2 cranky kids, having a guaranteed place to park is a lifesaver. Everything was fine until about a month ago when this new guy moved in. Let's call him Brad. From day one, Brad acted like he owned the place. He'd blast music late at night, leave his trash in the hallway, and park wherever he felt like it. At first, I tried to be understanding. Moving is stressful, and maybe he just needed time to settle in. Boy, was I wrong. One evening, I came home from a long shift at the diner where I work. My feet were killing me, the kids were hungry and whining in the back seat, and all I wanted was to park and get inside. But as I pulled up to my spot, there it was. Brad's shiny new BMW taking up my space. I was furious, but I kept my cool. I parked in a visitor spot and lugged the kids and our stuff upstairs. After getting the kids settled with some dinner, I went down to talk to Brad. I knocked on his door, and when he answered, the smell of weed hit me like a wall. "Hey, Brad," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I noticed you're parked in my spot. It's actually reserved for my apartment." Brad leaned against the door frame, looking at me like I was speaking a foreign language. "Yeah, so what? There are plenty of other spots." I took a deep breath. The thing is, it's my assigned spot. I need it because I often come home late with my kids and he cut me off. Look, lady, I don't care about your kids or your problems. I like that spot, so I'm gonna park there. Deal with it. And with that, he slammed the door in my face. I was shocked. I'd dealt with rude customers at the diner, but this was a whole new level of entitlement. I went back to my apartment, my mind racing. What was I supposed to do now? The next day, I talked to the building manager, a nice older lady named Mrs. Thompson. She listened to my story and shook her head. "I'm sorry, Sarah," she said. "I'll talk to him, but there's not much else I can do. We can't forcibly remove his car." Mrs. Thompson did talk to Brad, but it didn't make a difference. For the next week, every single day, I'd come home to find his BMW in my spot. I had to park further and further away, sometimes having to walk several blocks with my kids and all our stuff. It was exhausting, and I was at my wit's end. That's when my neighbor, Lisa, suggested I call a tow truck. "If he's parked in a reserved spot that's not his, they can tow him," she explained. "It's perfectly legal." I was hesitant. It seemed like such a drastic step, and I worried about escalating the situation. But after another week of this nonsense, I decided enough was enough. The next day, I came home from work, and sure enough, there was Brad's BMW in my spot. This time, instead of finding another place to park, I called the towing company Mrs. Thompson had recommended. "Rapid Towing, how can I help you?" a gruff voice answered. I explained the situation, my voice shaking a little. The man on the other end assured me they'd be there in 20 minutes. True to their word, the tow truck showed up right on time. The driver, a burly guy named Mike, checked my ID and the parking assignment sheet Mrs. Thompson had given me. Once he confirmed everything was legit, he got to work. Just as Mike was hooking up Brad's car, I heard shouting from across the parking lot. Brad was running towards us, his face red with anger. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" he yelled, getting right in Mike's face. Mike, to his credit, stayed calm. "Sir, I'm towing this vehicle because it's parked in a reserved spot without authorization." Brad turned to me, his eyes blazing. You called them, didn't you? You can't do this." I stood my ground even though my heart was racing. "Actually, I can. This is my assigned spot, Brad. I asked you nicely to stop parking here, and you refused." Brad's face twisted into a snarl. "You're gonna regret this, you bop." He pulled out his phone and started dialing. "Yeah, I need the police," he shouted into the phone. "Some crazy lady is having my car towed for no reason." I couldn't believe it. He was calling cop over a parking dispute? Mike looked at me and rolled his eyes, clearly used to this kind of drama. "Ma'am," he said to me, "I'm going to finish hooking up the car. If the police come, just explain the situation calmly. You haven't done anything wrong." I nodded, trying to keep my cool as Brad continued yelling into his phone and at us. True to Mike's word, it wasn't long before we heard sirens approaching. 2 police officers pulled up, looking slightly annoyed. I guess parking disputes weren't high on their list of exciting calls. Brad immediately launched into a tirade, pointing at me and Mike, claiming we were stealing his car. The officers listened patiently, then turned to me. "Ma'am, can you explain what's happening here?" I took a deep breath and laid out the whole story. How this was my assigned spot, how Brad had been parking there despite my request to stop, and how I'd finally called for a tow after weeks of this behavior. One of the officers, Officer Johnson, according to his name tag, nodded. "Do you have any documentation to prove this is your assigned spot?" Thankfully, I'd thought ahead. I pulled out the parking assignment sheet and my ID, showing them to the officer. He looked them over, then turned to Brad. "Sir, it appears this is indeed this lady's assigned parking spot. She has every right to have your vehicle towed if you park here without permission." Brad's face went from red to purple. But, that's not fair. I pay rent here too." Officer Johnson's partner, Officer Martinez, stepped in. "Sir, paying rent doesn't give you the right to park in someone else's assigned spot. Each tenant has their own designated space." Brad sputtered, trying to come up with more excuses, but the officers weren't having it. They explained that not only was the tow legal, but Brad could potentially be cited for misuse of emergency services for calling cop over a non-emergency. That shut Brad up pretty quickly. The officers stayed while Mike finished hooking up the BMW and drove off with it. They gave Brad information on where he could retrieve his car and how much it would cost him. As the police were leaving, Officer Johnson turned to me. "Ma'am, if you have any more trouble with this individual, don't hesitate to call the non-emergency line." I nodded, feeling a mix of relief and lingering anxiety. As everyone dispersed, I noticed several of my neighbors had come out to watch the drama unfold. Most of them gave me supportive nods or thumbs up. That night, I slept better than I had in weeks, knowing my parking spot would be free when I got home the next day. But part of me worried about how Brad would retaliate. I didn't have to wait long to find out. The next morning, I woke up to find my car covered in sticky notes, each one with a crude insult or threat written on it. It must have taken him hours to do this. I was angry, but I also couldn't help but laugh at how childish it was. I took pictures of everything before removing the notes, then went straight to Mrs. Thompson's office. When I showed her the pictures and explained what had happened, she was livid. "That's it," she said, her usual calm demeanor replaced with determination. "I've had enough complaints about this man. This is the last straw." Over the next few days, I noticed a flurry of activity around Brad's apartment. There were visits from Mrs. Thompson, from the property owner, and even the police at one point. I kept to myself, not wanting to get involved any further. A week later, I ran into Mrs. Thompson in the hallway. She had a satisfied smile on her face. "I thought you'd like to know," she said. "Brad's lease has been terminated. He has 30 days to vacate the premises." I was stunned. "Really? Just like that?" Mrs. Thompson nodded. "We have a zero-tolerance policy for harassment, and his behavior violated several clauses in the lease agreement. Plus, it turns out he lied on his rental application about his previous evictions." I felt a wave of relief wash over me. No more worrying about my parking spot, no more loud music at night, no more harassment. The day Brad moved out, I watched from my window as he loaded his things into a moving truck. He looked up at one point and saw me watching. For a moment, I thought he might start yelling again, but he just scowled and went back to loading his stuff. As the truck drove away, I felt like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. I'd stood up for myself and it had paid off. It wasn't easy and it was definitely stressful, but I'd shown my kids that it's important to stand up to bullies, even when they're adults. That evening, I treated the kids to pizza to celebrate our newfound peace. As we sat around the table, my older one asked, "Mom, is the mean man really gone?" I smiled and nodded. "Yes, sweetie, he's gone and he won't be bothering us anymore." "Good," she said, taking a big bite of pizza. "I like it better when you're not stressed." Out of the mouths of babes, right? I realized then that this whole ordeal had affected them too, and I was glad it was over, not just for me, but for them as well. From that day on, every time I pulled into my parking spot, I felt a little surge of satisfaction. It wasn't just a parking spot anymore. It was a reminder that standing up for yourself, even when it's hard, is always worth it in the end. The next one is a petty revenge story. I got a dog and my dog likes to swim. We have a park nearby with a dedicated area for dogs, including a pond, the dog pond, which is connected to other ponds through ditches and the likes. My dog is a bit of a pussy. He won't jump in the deep end. He needs a slope. There's 2 slopes, one on either side of the pond. The pond is about 30 meters across. We've been getting our rare days of sunshine for the past weeks, so that means people who fish go fishing. I already judge. Inflicting pain on animals is a weird hobby, but I don't own the park, so not a lot I can do. Now there's these 3 old-timers, late 60s, early 70s, who've been fishing in the dog pond for the past 5 years whenever the temperature gets above 25 degrees Celsius. I leash my dog so he won't bother them, tell them good day, walk around and let him swim on the other side. 5 years, never been a problem. Last week, Monday, I'm doing that exact same thing. One of them starts shouting, "You can't do that, we're fishing." First I ignored, then I shouted back, then it turned to a verbal altercation where one of them threatened to hook my dog, and I threatened to sink his boat. They have this really cool GPS boat. They didn't like that and threatened with physical violence, at which point I de-escalated and went my way. Had a few laughs about it on the way home. Didn't think it was too serious, boomers with attitude. Very next morning, both slopes on the dog pond were littered with fish hooks, 1,000s of them, both in the water and the surrounding area. I called the municipality and they cleaned it up the same day. I explained about the altercation, but there's nothing they could do. Called the police, but unless I want to report the physical threats, there's nothing they could do. So then I started reading up on fish species and their habits, and this guy in the store been schooling me. Now every night I spend half an hour prepping the best food these fish have ever eaten. Germinating corn, soaking tiger nuts in tuna extract, and making caramel vanilla salmon worm balls. The last ones are particularly tricky because you need the right consistency and they can't have lumps. Took me a few days of testing, so for about 10 days I've been making these feeding grounds for different fish species at their favorable spots everywhere in the park, but the old men's fishing spot, hopefully keeping them away. I don't even know if it does anything, and my girlfriend keeps saying, if you'd spend half the time you spend on this on something useful could be done. But I am delighted with myself and will continue to do so until the temperatures drop and I'm already contemplating next year. The next one is a malicious compliance story. I work for a visitor attraction in London. Generally, we are out on the floor answering questions, etc. We had a dedicated team that worked in the control room, usually supervisors or those that wanted to become supervisors. Normally, 1 or 2 people in the control room. They were never ever on the floor if they could help it. They watched the CCTV and controlled the breaks, lunches, etc. For instance, if a visitor sets off an alarm, they would call us and we would investigate the alarm. Management decided to pull the supervisors out onto the floor and train floor personnel to be in the control room. Good idea on paper, but in practice? Supervisors didn't want to go on the floor, and those on the floor didn't want to go into the control room. Some of us already worked in the control room as we relieved them for breaks, lunches, etc. Basically, if you were in the control room, you stayed in there. First training week went something like this. Someone that knew the control room training 3 or 4 of the floor people. Needless to say, that put us short-staffed on the floor and management had to go on the floor to cover. As how hard could it be? It will only be a week, then I can go back to my cushy desk job. First day I was training 3 or 4 floor staff and management supervisors were on the floor. Management told me treat them like normal floor staff. Okay, no problem. I asked everyone that I was training normal floor staff. We all got big smiles on our faces. Not even 10 minutes goes by and radio call. Can one of you bring the keys for the front door so we can let the public in? It's a 5-min walk from control to the front door. I radio one of the management on the floor. Come to control and pick up the keys and take to front door. I get a phone call. Just have so-and-so bring them over. There's 4 of you in there. As per procedure, nobody is allowed out of control room. Management take 5 men to get to control and then take the keys over to front door, so we are late opening. Next radio call. Which key is it? It's number X. They open the doors. Alarm goes off. Control, why did alarm go off? You need to call control to let us know exactly when to take alarm off. Procedure. All of this is written down. Procedures must be followed. Now that the public is in, alarms start going off for various reasons. The public loves going through doors that say door is alarmed. Normal stuff. I start radio calls to management on the floor. Charlie 3 go to door X, Charlie 3 go to door X, etc., etc. Delta 4 relieve Charlie 3 for Thier lunch. Lunchtime, I get phone calls from people who haven't been relieved for Thier lunch on time. Management hasn't figured out that travel time between your post and the break area is not included in your lunch break. If you have an hour lunch and it takes you 10 minutes walking time to get there, then basically your lunch is 40 min. 10 min to go from your post to break room and 10 min to go back to post. Normal control room staff knew this and would start lunches early to give everyone as much as possible a full lunch. More radio calls. Charlie 3, can you check the toilet report of water on the floor? Charlie 3, can you go to X visitor wants to use a voucher? Actually, Charlie 3 go to door X, but I'm with a visitor. Doors take priority, Charlie 3. For the rest of the day, we ran management crazy. Everything in the procedures was adhered to. Count the empty spaces in the car park. Check locks on the emergency gates. Check toilets, men's and women's, to see if they need to be refilled with toilet paper. Look for lights out. Fill in your task book, etc. Next day, needless to say, I wasn't in the control room. Didn't matter. The tone was set. Didn't matter who was in there. The rest of the week went by the same. Everyone that followed me ran management nuts. Management, to Thier credit, changed some things after that. Black sneakers can now be worn. More break rooms closer to posts have been opened. Procedures have been loosened up. Control people are back in control and floor people are on the floor. Everyone is now trained in the control room, but they only have to work it if they want. Still was a glorious week. The next one is an entitled people's story. Books had always been a part of my life. As a child, I would lose myself in the pages of my favorite novels, and as an adult, my love for books only grew. Over the years, I had collected an extensive collection of rare books, and they had become my most prized possessions. I had carefully curated my collection, ensuring that each book was in the best possible condition. One sunny Sunday afternoon, I had decided to take a day off and spend some quality time with my family. We spent the day exploring the local park and indulging in some delicious food. As we returned home in the evening, I had an uneasy feeling in my gut. Something just didn't feel right. As I walked towards my study, my heart sank. I could see that the door to my book room had been forced open. I rushed towards it and swung it open. My worst fears were confirmed as I surveyed the room. The shelves were bare and my rare book collection was gone. I felt like I had been punched in the stomach. I was devastated. I immediately contacted the police and reported the burglary. The officers arrived promptly, and I gave them a list of the books that had been stolen. I also provided them with an estimated value of each book. The police assured me that they would do everything they could to catch the thief, but I had little hope that my books would be recovered. Days turned into weeks, and there was no news from the police. I was feeling hopeless and devastated. My collection was my most prized possession, and it felt like a part of me had been ripped away. One day I received a call from a local bookstore. The owner told me that he had received an anonymous call from someone trying to sell rare books that matched the description of my stolen collection. The owner, being a book lover himself, was immediately suspicious of the caller's intent and asked them to bring the books to the store. The caller showed up at the store the next day, carrying a large bag. The owner recognized the books immediately as they matched the description of the books I had reported stolen. He called the police, who arrived promptly and arrested the thief. The books were recovered, and I was overjoyed. However, my joy was short-lived as I discovered that some of the books had been damaged. They had been thrown carelessly into the bag, and some of the spines were broken, and pages were torn. It was heartbreaking to see my beloved collection in such a state. I had them assessed by a professional, and the damage was estimated at several $1,000s. I contacted the thief's lawyer, and we negotiated a settlement. The thief agreed to pay for the damages and also pleaded guilty to the burglary. The trial was long and arduous, but justice was finally served. The thief was sentenced to several years in prison. As for me, I was just grateful to have my books back, even if they were a little worse for wear. In the end, I learned a valuable lesson about the importance of home security. I invested in a more advanced security system and also ensured that my book collection was insured. It was a tough experience, but I was glad that I had taken the necessary precautions to safeguard my most prized possessions. As for the thief, his time in prison had a profound effect on him. He realized the gravity of his actions and started working towards reforming himself. When he was released, he reached out to me to apologize for what he had done. He offered to pay for the damages again, but I refused. Instead, I suggested that he start his own book collection and channel his love for books into a more positive outlet. He took my advice to heart and started working at a local bookstore. Over time, he became an expert on rare books and started to collect them himself. He even started a program where he would visit schools and libraries to talk about the importance of reading and the value of rare books. He had truly turned his life around, and I was proud of him for it. In the years that followed, I continued to collect rare books, and my collection grew even more extensive. I made sure to take extra care in securing them, and I also started to catalog them in a digital database to keep track of them more easily. I shared my love of books with others, and even started a book club that met regularly at the local library. However, my peaceful existence was shattered one day when I received a call from the police. They had arrested someone for the theft of a rare book from a local bookstore. It was a book that I had seen before, and recognized as one that had been in my collection before it was stolen. I went to the police station to identify the book, and sure enough, it was one of mine. I was shocked and angry that someone would dare to steal from me again. The police told me that they had caught the thief in the act of stealing the book, and that they believed he was responsible for other thefts as well. I decided to press charges, and the thief was brought to trial. This time the trial was swift, and the thief was sentenced to a longer term in prison. However, this time I felt no joy or satisfaction in the outcome. I was just tired of the cycle of theft and destruction. I wanted to find a way to break it. The next one is a pro-revenge story. I had this cabin in the woods high up on the mountainside. When I bought the property, we were able to buy all the land near the cabin except for one parcel. The previous owner of the entire set of properties had a spoiled son who liked to get drunk and gamble away everything he earned. So we got all but one parcel. He managed to scrape up enough cash to get one parcel right below our cabin. His parcel was entirely surrounded by mine. There's a road going up and over the mountain that first passes by the cabin and continues on through his parcel, finally ending at a pond below that. When he decided to build on the parcel, I granted him an easement for power, water, and road access, which I had my lawyer write up because I was busy in the city. I was trying to be a good neighbor. I only went up on weekends, so I didn't have too many problems. We managed just fine for a few years. I didn't like him much, but we kept to ourselves, though he had a weird habit of sneering at me when he drove by in his girlfriend's car. The police came out a few times because he was fighting with his girlfriend, but he left me alone until one day during a particularly hot August. His girlfriend left him, but he won at the tracks. He bought a new truck. He liked his new truck. He drove his new truck past my cabin all weekend long, back and forth, non-stop. I was trying to get the last part of a rather difficult book finished, and didn't need a Mario Andretti wannabe tearing up my peace of mind. But it was a private road, so any traffic problems had to be settled without the help of law enforcement. I had a sweet cocker spaniel named Mindy who stayed inside most of the time and only went outside to do her business. She was terrified of the big Dodge as he went up and down the mountain, throwing gravel and mud everywhere. When I went outside to tell him to stop, he flipped me off, called me a few choice words, and threatened to run me over if I didn't get out of his way. I just shook my head and went inside, resolving to settle his problem with a lawyer instead of fighting him. I didn't want to accidentally kill him. He wasn't a very big guy and all mouth anyway. I figured it was the liquor talking, so I walked Mindy and kept her inside that weekend. I had to wear headphones to tune out his act while living in a cabin in the woods. He was pissed because I bought his father's land, despite the fact that his father left him enough money to buy it several times over. He told my solicitor all of this when he wrote up the easement. My lawyer informed me of this when I contacted him about the dangerous Dodge dirtbag. He continued driving up and down the mountain like a maniac for the next 4 weekends. He did not stop even in the dead of night. He just went on and on and on, and I locked my doors hoping he wasn't so deranged that he would set my cabin on fire. Fortunately, the second weekend my lawyer told me to get video and pictures if possible, but not to confront him lest he cook up a song and dance for his lawyer. So I set up a camera and a game by the corner of my house about 5 yards from the road. I have groceries delivered once a month to the cabin by the local supermarket in town. The delivery person has instructions to leave the bags on the back porch. I didn't hear her knocking on the 5th weekend, and so she let herself in and put the bags on the kitchen counter. While she was leaving, Mindy slipped outside to do her business but couldn't get back in. I didn't hear her barking, but I did hear her yelps when the drunk bastard ran her over. I ran outside, and he was standing over her cursing Mindy. He'd run her over and was taking his twisted frustration out on her while she was dying, so I shoved him away and scooped her up. I then raced into town to see the vet. By the time I got to town, she was cold and I knew it was too late, so I limped back home broken-hearted and angry. I took Monday off and buried her beneath an old bay tree. On Tuesday, I took the footage and the game camera stills into the city and gave them to my lawyer. The pictures were on film, so it took a couple of days to get them developed, but the VCR tape told the whole story. He'd seen her beside the cabin and had veered off the road to run her down. The evil grin on his red face looked demonic. I asked my lawyer if I could sue him. He said I could, and we had plenty of evidence to cause him serious harm, but in the meantime he'd still be living there and things would only escalate. At the time, dogs were considered property and didn't have anything in the way of rights. Still don't, which is a pity. But I wanted a fight, and my lawyer knew that if he didn't throw me a bone, I'd go back up that mountain and beat the dirtbag to death with his own wrenched-off arm. My lawyer calmed me down and took out the lease agreement. In it was a standard maintenance clause, but there was also a stipulation in the easement that prohibited acts that might disturb the peace and harmony of the owner. It had a quit clause that automatically rescinded his easement should he persist in such acts for a month or more. My lawyer had sent him a letter to the effect the second week and didn't get a reply. The mail was registered, and he had to sign for it in town at the post office. I had my lawyer serve him with a quit notice. In that state, a notice to quit an easement doesn't have the same level of difficulty as a notice to quit tenancy, which can drag out for 6 months or more. If you are in violation of an easement right and are ordered to quit it by the owner, you can appeal, but in the interim you must by law stay off the easement, and any utilities passing through can be cut off at the owner's pleasure, unless doing so can cause a life-threatening situation. But I didn't cut off his water and power right away. We didn't start proceedings on the suit until later. He continued to drive on the road after the order to quit, only faster and with more profanity. I got it all on tape. I told him so, and he said he didn't care. He said ugly like me should just die. So I decided to stay away until the suit was initiated. So a month later, I had workers on the mountain put in a nice gate. Solid construction in 3 feet of concrete. I could open and close it with a garage door opener. I had barbed wire fence around the whole property, so the only way in or out was via the gate. I had a pedestrian gate put in beside the road and left that unlocked. It was about a quarter-mile to the cabin and half again that to his place. A fairly long walk for a raging alcoholic. I got good pictures of him on the game camera that weekend. Dirtbag driving up to the gate in his big truck. Dirtbag trying to jimmy the lock. Dirtbag leaving and returning with a hacksaw to try to cut the lock. Dirtbag leaving in frustration. Dirtbag returning with his truck. Dirtbag leaving again. Dirtbag ramming the gate uphill at full speed. Finally, Dirtbag through the windshield, laying on the hood as the smashed truck rolls back down the mountain. The gate didn't even bend. The truck sure did. He lived, still not as ugly as me, but we can't get everything we want. 20-odd shots and more than enough proof to show to the judge to get a protection order. And since it was a small town, the same judge wasn't too pleasant with him when he took his last penny during the lawsuit. We even got his parcel and his flea-infested shack. We let him keep his busted-up Dodge. The next one is a petty revenge story. 2 years ago, I used to share an apartment with my sister and 2 other roommates. In the flat next to us lived 3 girls whom we had known for years, as we all used to live in the same dorm years ago, plus their 2 new roommates whom we didn't know well. The other girls were messy and kind of immature because they were younger than us, but we all mostly got along since we go way back. This one time, my sister and one of our roommates got into a huge argument with the girls from the other flat because they took utensils and clothes from our place without permission and lost them. I didn't participate in the argument, but there was obvious tension between the 2 flat residents. Anyway, a few days after that, after a long day of being cooped up in the library preparing for a difficult final, I got home late at night, and there was only one of my roommates home that night. Pretty much as soon as I got home, my face started swelling up and my tooth started aching like crazy. I was in so much pain I started crying, and there were no painkillers, and I had no way to get out to the pharmacy that late at night. My roommate, who also had nothing to do with the earlier argument, knocked on the door of our next-door neighbors, and one of their newer roommates whom we barely knew answered the door. My roommate then explained the situation to her, that I'm in excruciating pain, and asked if she could borrow some painkillers. The girl looked my roommate up and down and told her, "Oh, I have painkillers, but I'm not going to give them to her, because I'm the sister of the girl who got into a silly argument with her roommates." Obviously, I was stunned someone could be this petty, but I let it go, and I survived the night. Now, here's the pettiness on my behalf. A few days after that, I happened to be home late at night, and I heard the doorbell ring. I opened the door, and lo and behold, it was the same girl who refused to spare me an ibuprofen a few days ago. Except instead of being snarky, she looked super distraught and defeated. She looked both surprised and relieved that I was the one who answered the door that night. She opened her mouth and said, I'm sorry. I don't know how to say this. My charger died on me, and I have a final tomorrow morning and a submission now, and I just started preparing. I know you have one like mine, and I was wondering if I can borrow yours." Obviously, she was down on her luck that day, but because I wasn't my usual generous self, I looked her up and down and said, "No, sorry, I'm using it right now," and shut the door in her face. This might be the pettiest thing I've ever done in my life, but I don't exactly hate myself for it. The next one is an entitled people story. I totally neglected to check on my post for the last few days, and it seems I angered the Reddit gods. This post was removed, so I revised the title, hoping that would appease them. As I stated before, life has been pretty great, except for what I'm about to post here. Just a little update on me and my kids. We're all doing well. I'm still with my boyfriend Kyle, and we're enjoying a meaningful, loving, and wild relationship. I'm no longer a dancer, as I had to have some surgery on my lower back to fix a spinal issue that I had been dealing with for a number of years. Due to some in-house drama at the club, I decided to quit. Nothing post-worthy, as it really had nothing to do with me personally. I now work from home again, but I'm still good friends with everyone at the club. Anyway, that's about it for the update. On to the insanity. Well, as you saw by the title, you might have a clue. I got a phone call a month ago, and it was told to me that my mother, who I call Beelzadiot, passed away in prison from a stroke. At first, I didn't care. I told them that it was their problem, not mine, but my attitude changed when they told me that I was entitled to some inheritance. That threw me for a loop. Beelzadiot never had a will, so whatever she had in finances and assets was to be split between me and my two siblings. Apparently, she has been dead for over 4 months, and I was only just informed about it. Trippy. I became unhinged when I heard the number. From the deaths of my grandparents, this idiot was sitting on nearly $500K. I had assumed she squandered the money to pay for her own bullcrap during the years I still lived with her, which was why she always demanded money from me. But no, she never touched it and just lived off Social Security, whatever she could get from relatives, and my income up until I moved out. I was seething. Not only did she have the money to pay her own bills, but she took so much money from me over the years, and all of the bullcrap she put me through, all because of her own greed and narcissism. I was furious. In total, she had the $500K, the house, and my grandparents' house in assets. A lawyer was assigned to her estate recently to work everything out, and she spoke to my siblings about their shares. Because they are also in jail, they want me to be the one to handle it all. So I had to take time off work and go back to my old state to handle everything. I visited my siblings in jail and we talked. They both acknowledged that Beelzadiot had destroyed their lives in many ways, and manipulated them into treating me like crap. I learned the reason behind why Beelzadiot had it out for me. I was the only one that worked hard to succeed in life. My siblings were both lazy and just gave in whenever she snapped her fingers. Not me. I was the better child, and she resented me for it. She saw I was going to surpass her in life, and it bothered her. She did love my son, but it was a love that was built on a foundation of jealousy and bitterness that she felt for me. Not healthy. I chose to have her cremated as I wasn't going to plan some elaborate funeral for the woman who tried to destroy my life and kidnap my kid. Her ashes were dumped into the nearest body of water, eliminating her from existence. Farewell, Beelzadiot. My siblings asked me to hold their shares until they were released. They both apologized and said they won't be a bother to me once they are. I told them it was no trouble and that I forgive them. Maybe we can work on some form of familial relationship once they are out. Maybe. I'm very skeptical. I decided to give them both the houses and their shares of the money once they are free. I have no desire to live in my old state again so close to my ex-husband. I set up a bank account and put their shares into it, and it'll sit there until they are free. The house keys are in a safety deposit box at the bank, along with the house deeds and some other heirlooms I don't want for myself. I was able to go into my old house and collect a few things I had left behind when I moved. On to the drama. A few of my crappy relatives had learned about Beelzadiot dying and filed in small claims court to sue me for a cut of the inheritance. Apparently, Beelzadiot had borrowed a lot of money from them and never paid it back, so they were going to go after me for it. The judge dismissed their cases because there was no contract, and because Beelzadiot is dead, there was no way to determine if their claims were true or not. If they had simply asked me, I would have given them some of the money, but now because they tried suing me, I'm keeping the cash out of ducking spite. One of them even tried to get their claim on Judge Judy, but it didn't work. I guess Judge Judy had better crap to do. LOL. No, woman. I will not appear on national television so you can get some petty revenge against me for something my mother did. Duck you. This relative, who is a cousin, has been all over Facebook, threatening me for the better part of a week. She is making claims against me that I am abusing my children, threatening to call CPS, that I stole from her, and a bunch of other crap that the other relatives are trying to question me over. I sent her a very direct message that if she didn't tell the truth, I would be sending the screenshots to her employer and filing against her in small claims court. I reminded her that her case was thrown out because she can't get blood from a turnip. Beelzadiot borrowed money. Sorry, but that isn't my problem. She was forced to tell the truth, and now many of my relatives won't talk to her. Mind you, most of them are crappy, so they get no points for the minor amounts of integrity. I'm back home now and ready to continue on with my life like this last month didn't happen. People are crazy. The next one is an entitled parent story. My daughter had her 9th birthday last week. Since she was very young, she accompanied me in nearly everything I did. As I like to cook and bake, she also had already plenty of experience helping by making various dishes and cakes. For her last birthday, however, she wanted to go solo for the first time, meaning I was to sit and wait in case she had a question, but everything else was up to her. She was incredibly proud, and so was I. From picking the recipe, measuring, mixing, etc., the only thing I did was pull it out of the oven. She then proceeded to make the frosting and decorate the cake, again all by herself. Needless to say, everybody was very proud of her, and she was really looking forward to sharing her cake with the family and chipping in with everyone about her process. My mom is also a baker, and she heavily complimented my daughter on how wonderful the cake looked and tasted, and soon all of us will be coming to my daughter for advice. My daughter was glowing with joy. Everybody complimented her, as the cake was indeed delicious and beautiful. That was apparently too much for my dad, who started to get increasingly fussy. First off, he started his, "Maybe you are trying to poison us with this" jokes, and I shushed him. Then when everybody asked my daughter about how she did it, he got louder and louder, interrupting her to tell us all that he is also capable of making cake. His cakes will always taste better. It wasn't even a difficult cake, etc. Every time somebody else told him to be quiet, as it was my daughter's moment. So he waited to let the stupid cake talk pass and then started interrupting every conversation that followed just to make it all about him. He even kind of pounded when she opened her presents, as nobody asked what he thought of the presents. So yeah, dear people of Reddit, that is my dad, trapped in the body of a 65-year-old man with the mind of a bratty 3-year-old. The next one is an entitled people story. Living in a suburban neighborhood has its perks, but it also has its challenges. I have lived in my house for over 10 years and have always had friendly neighbors. We would often lend each other tools or even have a friendly chat on the front porch. But one day, everything changed. I came home from work to find a large RV parked in my driveway. At first I thought that it was a mistake, but then I noticed that it had been there for days. I asked my neighbors if they knew whose RV it was, but no one seemed to know. I then realized that it belonged to my neighbor, Tom. Tom was new to the neighborhood and had recently moved into one of the houses across the street. At first I thought he was a nice guy, but that all changed when he started to use his RV as a vacation home on my property. He would stay there for days at a time, have loud parties, and leave his trash all over the place. I tried to be diplomatic and asked him to move his RV, but he simply ignored me. I even went as far as to talk to his landlord, but they refused to do anything about it. That's when I knew that I had to take matters into my own hands. I started by looking up the laws on RV parking and discovered that it was illegal to park an RV on someone else's property for more than 48 hours without permission. Armed with this knowledge, I confronted Tom and told him that he had to move his RV. He got angry and threatened to sue me if I touched his property. Days went by and Tom was still parked in my driveway. He had even put up a canopy and started to use my electricity to power his RV. I decided that enough was enough and called the police. They came and told Tom that he had to move his RV. He did, but he only moved it a few feet over, still on my property. I realized that I needed to take more drastic measures. I contacted a local towing company and had Tom's RV towed away. Tom was livid and came over to my house, banging on my door and demanding to know what had happened to his RV. I calmly explained that he had parked it illegally and that I had it towed away. He threatened to sue me, but I knew I was in the right. A few days later, I received a letter in the mail from Tom's lawyer. He was suing me for the cost of his RV and for the stress that I had caused him. I couldn't believe it. I knew that I had done nothing wrong, but I was still worried about the outcome. The court case was long and stressful. Tom had a good lawyer and he was determined to make me pay. But after months of fighting, the judge ruled in my favor. Tom had to pay for the cost of his RV, and he was also ordered to leave the neighborhood. After Tom left, I was finally able to breathe a sigh of relief. But the stress of the whole situation had taken its toll on me. I decided to take a vacation and travel to Europe for a few weeks to clear my head. Update: since then, a new family has moved into Tom's old house, and they have been wonderful neighbors. We often share meals and even have a neighborhood block party once a year. I am grateful for the sense of community that we have, and I'm glad that the RV incident is a thing of the past. The next one is a pro-revenge story. This is my first post here, and I have been debating whether it belongs here or in petty revenge. If I have chosen the wrong sub, please let me know. About 15 years ago, when I was a kid living at home, we had a house with a vast backyard in the suburbs, and the neighboring property next to our driveway was a set of 3 attached rental flats, each with their front door facing our house. We were usually on good terms with most of our neighbors, including those next door. After the family in the middle flat moved out, an older single woman moved in. She was usually at home, so I doubted she had a job and wasn't particularly friendly. She kept to herself, which was fine, and never really acknowledged any of the neighbors. Whatever, that was cool. So one Saturday around midday, I was out back with the lawnmower, earning myself some pocket money. Since we had a big yard about 20 minutes in, I was about halfway done when suddenly a noise control officer knocked on the door. They told us to hurry it up, as they had received a complaint. Although they thought it was ridiculous, they had to say something. It was a bit stupid, but whatever. We weren't a loud family at all. No parties, screaming, anything like that. Over the next month, we kept getting visits from noise control. Always during the day, mind you. We would get visits for mowing the lawns, and even had a couple of complaints about my younger sister and me playing and hanging out in the backyard on weekends or in the afternoon after school. Again, we weren't all that loud. At the time, I would have been about 13, so more often than not, the boy next door and I would just be chilling on the swings, talking. Not loud, just being outside. We'd never had an issue with noise before. None of our other neighbors had ever had a problem, and we had never had noise control called before now. So we asked around. It was fairly obvious at this point that the snobby woman who had moved into the flat next door was making all the complaints. My father would always stock up on firewood in the summer to prepare for winter, and would have to chop it up himself. It was the first weekend of chopping for the year, and it was about 2 p.m. on a Saturday. He pulled out his old chainsaw, and it was on for about a minute and a half at most, before he realized the chain needed to be replaced. He turned it off, grabbed the axe, and proceeded to chop wood the long way. Next thing we knew, noise control showed up. The officers were sick of having to visit at this point, and were pretty friendly with Dad by now. It turned out that, yes, it was the new neighbor next door. It also turned out that she had been an issue for them for a while, and noise control was well aware of her stupid complaints from all of her previous addresses. Unfortunately, they were legally obligated to follow through with them. The following weekend, surprise, surprise, we got a visit after Dad had been chopping more wood with the axe. Because the chainsaw was out of action, he decided to give her something to complain about. A family friend of ours happened to be a truck driver. He drove a big rig, almost Optimus Prime level, up and down the country. He was back in town that weekend, so we gave him a call and he was keen to help us out. The next step was to warn all the other neighbors who were all fully on board because as it turned out, we weren't the only ones she was complaining about. The next weekend, around 9 a.m., we spent about half an hour getting this great big truck down our driveway. It was a pretty wide driveway, but it was a pretty wide truck too, so it was a damn tight squeeze. Having been good friends with previous neighbors, we were familiar with the internal layout of those flats. The bedrooms were directly next to their front doors, facing our driveway. We managed to get the cab of this massive truck far enough into the driveway to be directly next to this woman's bedroom. There was about 1.5 meters separating the truck and her wall. Perfect. On went the horn, loud as hell, terrifying our cats. On it went again and again. And then we kids got a turn. You could hear that thing a block away. We did it for about 10 minutes, went inside for a coffee, came back out and ran the horn one more time for good measure before our friend took off. This time there were no noise control officers, no complaints, nothing. She left the next week. The next one is a petty revenge story. I was a public employee for many years, having a middle management role for about 20 years. I reported to a department head, who reported to the mayor. I had a small staff, typically 5, 10 people who were mostly part-time. They rotated every few years, and I tried my best to make their time with me valuable. I helped them pad out their resumes, paid for trainings, and more. Tim was initially a decent employee, but quickly decided he was the greatest employee of all time. His overconfidence often led to mistakes or being overextended, and he needed to be bailed out. He was good at basic tasks, but had a hard time with math, grammar, and interacting with adults. Part of my job was seeking federal grants for small infrastructure projects. Think adding ADA benches to nature trails and curb cuts on old sidewalks or bridges on walking paths across ditches. I would write the grants and specs. The small staff would help administer the grant. Sometimes they would do the work. Sometimes they would oversee contractors. The grants were extremely clear and included a matching component. Sometimes we would add cash or equipment time or staff time. Sometimes we would have volunteer organizations match with labor. We were doing a bridge grant, and I put the employee Tim in charge. It was phase 3 of 3, and we had a lot of experience. There were 21 bridges we were replacing in batches of 7. Tim just had to keep the process going with volunteer match labor hours. The process was practically automatic. All he had to do was show up with materials and stay out of the way. He did an adequate job, barely. I had to keep him on track to stay in spec. We are spending money to improve water quality. He wanted to improve recreation. We sent a lot of emails and texts about it. The department also used project codes to track grant spending. Each grant had a code, and it was very easy to code all the time and materials through the accounting department. The volunteers signed logs each day, and the process was pretty tidy. That fall, Tim continued to struggle with basic tasks, and eventually demanded a promotion for his outstanding work. He did not meet the very clear requirements for a promotion, government requirements, through his own laziness, despite being given opportunities to become qualified. Eventually, he became intentionally negligent and put himself and others in danger. I called him into the office after an egregious incident and offered him the opportunity to resign or be fired. Resigning means he could be eligible for rehire in a different department. Fired means he is blacklisted from the city. He refused to resign, and so I terminated him. He seemed shocked. I think he thought it was a bluff or scare tactic. He thought he was a critical cog in the machine, but he was a thorn in my side. His dad is a well-known local attorney. I had pulled Tim's state criminal record, and on close inspection, it was clear Daddy was bailing him out throughout life. Assault charges dropped, DUI pled to a traffic violation, possession pled to an infraction. Tim decided to come after me. His first move was to call the federal division that oversees my grants and report fraud. They launched an investigation. My records were 1,000% immaculate. They called him into a meeting, and his proof of fraud was that he felt that the bridges should have been a lower priority, and the money would be better spent elsewhere, so the fraud was misuse of funds. But the grant specs were followed precisely by him. He had tried to divert funds, and I had stopped him. I had written evidence. The project he had accused on was the literal poster child for success and was included in a slideshow to the legislature on the success of the grant program. The feds and city powers were livid for wasting time. I had reams of perfect documentation. He was yelled out of the building. Then he filed a wrongful termination suit. He told his dad about the apparent mistreatment, and his dad filed. I contacted the city attorney and dumped hundreds of pages of documentation with a summary in his email. I was in City Hall when Daddy Attorney came slinking out of the legal department, apologizing for his idiot son. I heard from a mutual friend Daddy gave Tim a thorough reaming and withdrew the financial support that had allowed him to live on part-time work. He is doing better today, but right around the time his wife discovered his ongoing affair, the mistress got pregnant, and things got rough. The next one is an entitled people story. In 2020, I lost my home in a wildfire and was left with only what I could pack in a Ford Focus during the evacuation. I was renting a basement apartment in a country house, and most of my stuff went up in flames. I realized that while my car may have good gas mileage, it wasn't going to hold a lot of stuff or tow anything. My landlord evacuated his family in a big GMC truck with a fifth-wheel trailer. He had everything he needed from emergency food storage to backup vehicles. His wife drove another truck out, fully loaded with a trailer full of their stuff. They had everything they needed to survive, and more. This made me realize that I needed to be better prepared. I had to couch surf for a while and could never stay in one place for long because I was a guest and not a tenant. So I ended up living in a tent in a field with several other people who had also lost their homes to the fires. It was like a tent village set up by a local charity. The shelters were beyond full, and since it's a warm climate, tents were the next best option. I managed to get a used but decent-sized tent and basically furnished it like a tiny apartment with a cot, a small table, and some chairs. I even hosted a poker night in it a few times, though I made sure not to leave anything worth stealing when I went to work. I was still going to work almost every day, and even volunteering for extra shifts. I was saving money since I wasn't paying rent, and I made up my mind to keep saving to one day buy a truck of my own because if this situation with the wildfires or some other disaster ever happened again, I needed to be better prepared. A few months ago, I put down over a year's worth of savings to buy a used Chevy Silverado 1500 with a canopy already on it. It had a few dents, a big diagonal scratch across the hood, and the paint was a bit weather-worn. But so what? It had a good bit less than 100,000 miles on it and a list of recent repairs that included a new radiator. I had spent a year living as cheaply as possible to save as much as possible. I wanted a truck and a camp trailer in case the fires ever come back. Some people have called me a hoarder for picking up stuff off the side of the road and using it, but I don't keep all that stuff at my apartment. In fact, I keep almost minimal furniture. Some remark that my apartment looks like it was just moved into, as I still keep some of my stuff packed in boxes. I want to be able to pack and leave quickly if I have to, especially since the world only seems to be getting worse. I bought the truck, an ironically silver Silverado. I bought it from a man who looked to be in his 50s, and he said he had a bad back and couldn't use it anymore. He gave me a steal of a deal when I came to get it, dropping the price by $1,000 because he felt I was clearly in love with it, and I am. I'm very happy with the truck. She drives like a dream. A big heavy dream, but still a dream, and she was clearly underdriven by the previous owner, as it's still not at 100,000 miles. I still kept my old Ford Focus though, so my fuel costs wouldn't skyrocket. A few weeks after I bought the truck, I was out in the same general area where I bought the truck looking at a used camp trailer that I was possibly interested in buying. But it ended up being in such bad shape that I turned it down because it was beyond my skills to repair. Before leaving the town, I stopped to eat at a local diner. Great burgers there, by the way. As I was leaving after having dinner, I noticed a woman who looked to be in her 40s looking over my truck. I'm not going to use the term Karen to describe this person because I know 2 women named Karen, and they are both fantastic people, but she did have that look that people associate with the stereotype. I asked the lady what she was doing poking around my truck, and she gave me a side glare while demanding to know where I got it. I said I just bought it a few weeks prior. She rushed up to me and said I didn't buy it, I stole it. I told her no, I purchased it from the title owner, so that makes it mine. The lady then rifled through her purse to pull out a smartphone and scrolled through it. She showed me a photo of a truck in it, and I'll be a monkey's uncle. It was the same truck. The license plate and scratch on the hood were clearly visible. There was also a man in the photo, the same guy who sold me the truck. When I acknowledged this, the lady started yelling, see, and then demanded I return it to her. She held out her hand for the keys and kept saying to give it back. I told her I bought the Silverado fair and square off the guy in the photo and that it is my truck now. But she didn't let up. She went and sat on my bumper and called the police. She was heavily exaggerating while talking to the operator. I'm not sure what they call the person on the line when you call police. She refused to get off my truck, so I decided to wait it out for the police to show up. When the police arrived, I stayed completely calm, but the lady went off and started working up tears, saying that her truck went missing some time ago, and she finally found it. Then she demanded they arrest me for grand theft auto and get her truck back. I calmly unlocked the doors, got my insurance card, registration, and license to hand to one of the officers. I told them to just check my documents and they'd see I'm the legal owner, but the lady did not let up. She tried to run to the door of the truck I'd opened, but I relocked it before shutting it. She tried repeatedly to pull on the handle while telling the police to just arrest me already. One of the officers calmed the lady down while the other ran my information. He came back after a few minutes and said everything checks out. The lady was gobsmacked. She said that it couldn't be and demanded the police check again. Then she pulled out her phone to show more pictures of the truck. I pointed out that the man in one of the photos was the one who sold the truck to me, and I have no idea what relation the lady is to him. But he's the only person I bought the truck from. The police asked her who it was, and she said it was her soon-to-be ex-husband. They were going through a divorce. I pointed out when I bought the truck, her husband's name was the only one on the title. The lady yelled at me that he'd originally bought it for her, and it was missing one day after she came home. All I could do was shrug and say I did not know that. But her husband was the legal owner before me, and I bought the truck from him. The police told her that I was correct, and it is legally my truck now. The lady went from crazy to just very sad as she cried that it was her truck, and he sold it without her permission. I did feel sorry for her, and said to the police that they may want to do a wellness check on her or something. They said I was free to go, and they would handle the situation from there. When I was getting ready to leave, the lady yelled that she was going to follow me and find out where I live. But the 2 officers didn't let her do so. I left the parking lot and hightailed it on the highway out of there. Later, I contacted the guy who sold me the truck, and he admitted that the crazy lady is his soon-to-be ex-wife. She cheated on him for the 2nd time, and it was the final nail in the coffin for their marriage. The truck was always in his name only, and that woman had signed a prenup when they married. So the divorce was not going in her favor. It's been months now, and that lady has not found me again. So I'm probably in the clear as long as I avoid the area I bought the truck in. Though for all I know, she's not even living there anymore since her husband divorced her. It was a crazy experience, but it made me grateful that I did my due diligence when purchasing the truck and had all the necessary documents to prove that I am the legal owner. The next one is an entitled parent story. I, 21F, made the decision to cut my stepfather out of my life completely. I also made the choice that he will not be seeing my daughter. Period. He was so abusive to me growing up and pretended the abuse didn't happen. He constantly gaslights me. He mentally and emotionally abused me. When I was having mental problems, my stepdad convinced my mother I was lying. He would call me names and make fun of me for not knowing how to do things I wasn't taught how to do. He would tell me how stupid I am. He would make fun of me for being autistic and bipolar. He would do or say things to purposely provoke me. He would say, "I wish you would hit me, fight me, what's up?" The thing is, I never challenged him to a fight. I would defend myself from further injury, and he would tell everyone I hit him that I started a fight with him. Keep in mind, I was a 5'5", 120-pound girl. He would physically abuse me. He would punch and slap me in the face, shove me against walls. He threw things at me. He told me that he wishes my attempt succeeded. He would always exclude me from family outings and going out places. I was excluded from everything. I got awards from an art show, and he claimed I was showing off and was angry that I was trying to hang them up inside my bedroom and demanded that I throw them away. He was upset because I had awards and my sister did not. He told me that it's not fair that I'm rubbing those words in her face because she didn't win any. My sister was his favorite, and anything she wanted she got. I was stuck with old clothes that didn't fit while my sister got new books, new makeup, new clothes, new shoes, you name it. She was the golden child. I was forgotten about. Every time I had plans with my mother, he'd force her to cancel them so she can go with him. She chose men over me. I had a daughter in February. I love her so much and want to protect her. My mother asked when I would let him see the baby. I made it clear that wasn't happening. He is angry I won't let him see her. He said to my mom, "If I can't see her, then nobody else can." It's not fair that she's excluding me when I provided food, clothes, and a roof over her head. She owes me. She was a difficult child to raise. I wasn't difficult. I had mental issues that weren't taken seriously or diagnosed. I went through a lot of trauma that my family denied even happening. My stepdad went on FB and talked about how I'm excluding him and that I'm an ungrateful brat. He had family reaching out to me to get over the crappy things he'd done. He will never see my daughter. He will never see me again. He is cut out of my life forever. The next one is an entitled people story. I'm a simple woman who has always enjoyed a peaceful life, surrounded by my family, my pets, and my beautiful garden. For years, my garden had been my sanctuary, my place of solace where I could escape the stresses of everyday life and enjoy the natural world around me. However, that all changed when our homeowners association began sending us letters and fines, claiming that our garden was violating the bylaws. At first, my husband and I tried to compromise and comply with their demands, but their harassment only intensified. The letters became more frequent, the fines became steeper, and they even threatened to sue us for $100,000. I was devastated. How could something so peaceful and beautiful be considered a nuisance? My garden was home to countless pollinators, such as butterflies and bees, that played a vital role in our ecosystem. I refused to let our homeowner association destroy it, so I decided to fight back. At first, finding a lawyer was difficult. Many turned me down, stating that my case was unwinnable, but I refused to give up. I finally found a legal team who believed in my cause, and together, we gathered information and presented a strong case that proved my garden was environmentally important and not hurting anyone. The day of the court hearing was nerve-wracking, but I was ready. As we presented our case, the opposing lawyer and homeowner association board mocked us, and even brought in my strange neighbor to give a ridiculous testimony about giant butterflies and millions of mosquitoes. However, the judge saw through their tactics and awarded us the same amount the homeowner association was demanding from us, plus reimbursement for the fines we had to pay. I thought the battle was over, but I was wrong. The homeowner association refused to back down, and they continued to harass us even after the court ruling. They sent us more letters, threatened to evict us, and even tried to restrict our access to our own home. It was a nightmare. and I feared for my family's safety. Desperate for a solution, I reached out to the media. I told them my story, and it quickly went viral. People from all over the country reached out to offer their support and share their own stories of homeowner association harassment. The pressure on our homeowner association grew, and eventually they backed down. They issued a public apology, reimbursed us for all the fines, and promised to never harass us again. It was a hard-fought victory, but it wasn't the end of the story. I continued to fight for the right to have a garden without the fear of homeowner association harassment. I spoke to lawmakers, environmental groups, and other homeowners who had also experienced harassment from their homeowner associations. Together, we worked to change the laws in our state to protect the rights of homeowners to have gardens and natural spaces on their property. Years later, I look back on that time with a mixture of pride and sadness. Pride in the fact that we stood up for what we believed in and won, but sadness in the fact that it took so much effort to do so. I hope that our story inspires others to fight for their own rights and stand up to their homeowner associations when necessary. Update. Since our victory, our garden has thrived. We continue to welcome all the wildlife that comes to visit, and our garden has become a community gathering place for neighbors to come and enjoy the natural beauty of our surroundings. We have even started a community garden project to encourage others to plant pollinator-friendly plants and help protect our environment. In the end, our fight was worth it. We proved that, when we come together and stand up for the next one is a pro-revenge story. Anyone who has seen my posts know I used to work in the private security field. Not mall cops, but highly trained and skilled and armed security. We worked residential buildings and complexes that were very high-end, like $200,000 cars in the parking garages high-end. Now, places like this are Karen Central. Imagine apartments full of Karens and entitled teenagers. Now the company owner was awesome. A cop as his regular job, he understood what we faced. His advice was to be nice but put the hammer down if you have to and don't take their crap. Also, that if we didn't get 2 complaints a month about us for worthless crap that weren't engaging the residents enough. LOL. So, this is important to the revenge. Each supervisor had 10-15 properties under their control. Regular officers patrolled them, but we were in charge of helping with evictions, attending town halls on security issues, deciding how an officer patrols or updating what areas are being a problem or needing checked. I had 12. Now in this one apartment complex, we had a couple always calling us. We have an emergency line open from 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. When we get there, they cry about their upstairs neighbor. It was a list of things they just changed. Stomping, music, talking, cooking, smells, their dog going number 1 on the balcony, and it is dripping onto theirs. Valid complaints if we found evidence, and we never did. When they see we were starting to question if they were real, they changed tactics and went racist. The couple above them were a sweet and wonderful middle-aged Asian couple. Husband was an immigrant, but the wife was a born and raised American. This racist creates had only talked to the husband, so they assumed, as all racists do, that they were both immigrants. So this white sheet-wearing couple started making comments like, "Those Asians, and they are in America, why can't they cook American food?" And, "I'm afraid to be in the parking garage when one of them is driving in it." While it angered me, those comments alone weren't enough for an eviction. Only thing I could do had my officers put exact phrasing in the report. I did ask the property manager about the comments, and she said if they didn't say them to the residents and the residents didn't complain, there wasn't much she could do. So I tried to think of some way to get them evicted. Not only were they lying to get a couple evicted, but were calling in false things and wasting the officers' time to respond. And they didn't call just every once in a while. They called sometimes twice in on night, usually 5-8 times a week. So a month later, the opportunity was handed to me. The Asian couple called me during the day and informed me they were going out of the country, China, for 2 weeks and no one would be in their apartment. They told me this just in case the other couple start complaining I would know they were lying, and asked to check their door once a night to make sure it was locked and not broken into. I informed the Asian couple to not tell their neighbor, none of them that they were leaving, and besides myself, only tell the property manager. We had a patrol meeting that night. Officers didn't work one specific region, so I told them all my plan. I wanted them to respond each time they call and write down exactly what they said happened and also any racial terms, no matter how minor. Mark the report urgent and send it out. We had an online system for all business, email, schedules, report submitting, you get the idea, so away we go. During those 14 days, they complained 18 times. Everything was documented, and I took it to the manager. She looked it over and said, let's evict them. Side note, the client gets charged more for emergency response than they do for regular patrols, meaning their lies were costing money. So there was no homeowner association because they were rentals. In this situation, myself, the property manager, and the tenants sit down at a table. The charges for eviction or read. If the eviction of security related, then I say what violations have been broken, etc. Not opinions, just facts based on the reports which the tenants get a copy of. Then the tenants have a right to speak and ask questions. The property manager then decides what happens next. Do they stay or do they go? So they were sent a formal letter stating they were facing eviction and had 10 days to set up a meeting. If not, the eviction will be processed. They set one up. I get there, and the a-hole couple and the manager are already present. The wife immediately digs into me because I was armed. Uniforms for those situations are a dress shirt, slacks, tie, and one weapon and one magazine. P.S. like elections can be dangerous. I just politely informed her that it was my uniform and not her call to make. She tried to say she felt uncomfortable and wanted to reschedule, but the manager said this happens now or I will evict you, so they agreed to continue. Now, for legal reasons, these sessions were recorded by video. That way the tenant can't lie in eviction court or sue. In front of me were all 18 reports and went over each one. Time, date, who called, apartment number. I also read out each line telling them to tell me what they feel is false and what is true. The only thing they said, the racial terms weren't true. At the end of each report, I basically said the report is accurate in the fact that tenants in apartment XYZ were playing their music too loud, but you are claiming the comments about their race are false. I got a yes answer every time. About the 7th one, I think the wife caught one. She started complaining that I was dragging it out. I just smiled politely and reminded her that this was my time and she ample opportunity to object and ask me questions, but only after I was done. And then went through the rest and let them build a defense. Then after I was done getting the admit to lies, I informed them that tenants in said apartment were actually out of the country at the time of those 18 reports, and that the tenants provided proof that they were gone. And my officers checked the apartment one time a night and confirmed that it was empty. Then I smiled pleasantly and ended my part, but the look on their face was a mix of anger and fear. They didn't have a defense, basically saying myself and the manager were choosing immigrants over Americans. Oh, did I mention the manager is an immigrant? That went over like a hand grenade in a collection plate. Once they said that she stopped it and told them she was. That made matters worse because they said she was just taking up for her own kind. During this, I'm calm and collected. Inside my mind, I'm thinking, oh crap. After a few more racial remarks, the manager just stopped them and said guilty, and she would process the eviction paperwork with the courts in the morning. The next one is a petty revenge story. It was January 2022. A new wave of COVID hit, and it devastated the workforce in the major cities. On average, about half of the workforce for any industry was homesick for about a week at the same time. Shelves in supermarkets weren't stocked because there weren't enough workers to keep them full. The number of bus routes was cut in half. The list goes on. At my retail store, all but 2 of us were sick. With only 2 people on staff, we couldn't get to everything, so we had to decide which parts of the job we'd neglect. Most of our revenue is from online sales, so we decided to close the store and focus on dispatching online orders. We still had to answer phone calls and emails, though, so we were very stressed. This was only happening in the major cities, of course. More rural locations dodged the major disruptions. One day, I got a call from a customer. He placed an online order the day prior, paid for express post, but noticed it hadn't been sent. He called to ask why it hadn't been sent. I looked at his account and saw he lived in a rural town an hour away. This was the conversation. Customer: Hi, I placed an order yesterday with express post. Why hasn't it been sent yet? Me: I'm very sorry. There are only 2 of us on staff because of COVID, and we're doing the best we can to keep up with the online orders. Customer: But I paid for express. Me: Yes, and as I explained, there are only 2 of us on staff. We've had to close the store, and there are a lot of orders to pack. We pack them from oldest to newest, so we're trying our best. Customer: Well, your best isn't good enough. I paid for express. It should have been sent out by now. My best wasn't good enough? What an absolute piece of crap. At this point, I had dealt with enough stress, so I let him have it. Me. Paying for express doesn't mean we pack the order faster. It means that once the courier has it, they deliver it to you faster. That extra money you spent doesn't go to me or this company. It goes to the courier. There are orders older than yours, and they have priority. They have waited longer than you and will be packed first. Customer, I don't care. You need to ship it today. Me, I can't promise that. Do you have any idea what COVID has done to the workforce here? Customer, no, and I don't care. If you don't ship my order today, I promise I'll never shop with you again. I genuinely laughed out loud at that. Me, I literally could not care less. It's no skin off my nose. At that point, I hung up. For the entree of my revenge, I purposely skipped his order even though I caught up to it. It got sent the next day. The main course, though, that was tasty. I blocked his account so he couldn't shop with us again. He promised he wouldn't, so I wanted to make sure he didn't break his promise. He tried to, though. He made another account. I recognized the name and confirmed it was him through the shipping address. I canceled the order and processed the refund. For revenge's dessert, I did something truly petty. When you process a refund, you reverse the payment made by the debit card. You can put a note in it when you do so the customer knows why that money is reappearing in their bank. The note I put was, to help you keep your promise. The next one is an entitled people story. My mother died when I was 12. At the moment of her death, our family could have been the stuff of movies. We had not seen our father in a couple of years, and we were well used to a life without any adult input. I had found my mother dead, called the ambulance, and the neighbors all witnessed the spectacle. By afternoon, there were her friends going through her closet. Before illness had stolen it, my mother's true pride was her looks. She was beautiful with stunning red hair. Even after the ravages of her illness, she was still very pretty. She had a green silk dress that was a treasure from the times before everything went bad. In that dress, she could still silence a room. I stood at her bedroom door and watched these women try on her clothes. One of them grabbed the emerald dress, and immediately the women started to fight over the prize. They all wanted it. One woman claimed it, but another grabbed it out of her hand and locked it immediately in her car. A tension took over the room. I stood and watched, powerless. The hyenas who did not get the dress started to bargain their pilfered loot to exchange for the dress, but no deals were made. Word of my mom's death must have gotten to the high school, and my older siblings were now walking in the door. My brother was a successful drug dealer who, at 17, ruled our house. We all feared him, even her friends knew he was dangerous. He had once taken a gun to my mother's head. Seeing him approaching the house, the women stopped what they were doing, and we all held our breath. But he did not come inside, so they returned to their looting. In the moment, I totally forgot I was afraid of him. I forgot that I believed he hated us. I forgot the gun. I showed him and my older sister the dress locked in the Vulture's car. Mom's stuff was piled on the seats of various friends' cars, but we all were focused on the dress. I went back in to witness the harvest of our home. On the day of the funeral, my brother was a different kid. He stood tall and brave. He made sure to escort each and every one of those vultures up to see our mother laid out in the coffin, adorned in the green dress. The next one is an entitled parent story. I own a house a couple of houses down from a school, so this was bound to happen eventually. When it's time for the kids to go home, my street is lined bumper to bumper with parents picking up their kids. The sidewalks are full of families who walk all the way to their cars. I often have to pick up balloons, snack packaging, old homework worksheets, and general garbage that the kids drop. If you're trying to get home around the time school lets out, there's no way you're going to be able to get there before the blockade the parents make is gone. This has been a problem for the few years we've lived here. There are two places the kids let out. My street, which is a small cul-de-sac with the school at the top, and a main road that's open all the way down to a baseball park with a wider road to allow street parking and two-way driving. Obviously, if you can't find parking, the tiny residential road isn't the way to go. There are 3 cars at my home. My car, my roommate's car, and my husband's utility van, which he parks on the road to avoid blocking our roommate since she's frequently in and out. Fridays, today, I work from home. So when I finished work, I poked my head out the window to look at my fruit tree near my driveway. It's spring and I keep excitedly looking for blooms. and I noticed a big white Buick SUV in the middle of my driveway blocking both spots for my car, which my husband was using since I was home, and my roommate's spot. Honestly, why would you park in somebody's driveway? So on top of these entitled parents blocking up our small residential road, this person decided to take up a private residence's driveway. I got on the phone with the non-emergency police line and took pictures of the vehicle and plate. Then I got my husband's keys and backed his vehicle up to block the SUV into my driveway, and I waited. 15 minutes later, the mom, bug-eye sunglasses, big old diamonds on her jewelry, and wearing athleisure, came around to hop in the driver's seat and smiled and waved at me sitting on my steps. Honestly, she probably thought I was the homeowner's kid or something because I'm in my early 20s rather than the homeowner. EM. Hi. Hope you don't mind. Me. You're trespassing. Why would you park in a private driveway? EM. Sorry, won't do it again. We were just leaving. She was being really dismissive and avoiding eye contact despite taking the sunglasses off. Me. I don't care. You have no right to park on my property. I'm on the phone with the police. EM. It was just for a second. I was just picking up my daughter. Me. It doesn't matter. You don't live here. You don't park here. At this point, I realized the non-emergency police weren't going to pick up, so I hung up and decided to mess with her a bit. She got in her SUV and dismissively waved at me, so I got in my vehicle that was blocking her in and waited, pretending to still be on the phone. She starts trying to back out of my driveway because there was a little bit of a gap between my utility van and my neighbor's car, but it was definitely too small for this Buick. I would like to point out that this vehicle has a scuffed front bumper, so I had a feeling she had no spatial awareness outside of her backup camera. Every time she backed up, I honked, still pretending to be on the phone. She tried again, I honked again. She looked at my grass, and I was about to start recording her in case she tried to go through my front yard. I honked again. If she kept trying to back out and hit my big-ass utility van, she would certainly lose. She gets out of her SUV and comes up to my van, recognizing she can't do anything without making it far worse for herself. Her face was visibly patchy from the distress, and she asked again, EM, are you really calling the police? Me. Yes, you're illegally parked on my private property. That's illegal. I don't care if it's for 5 seconds. Don't ducking do it. You don't live here. Her kid got out of the car, and I decided that was enough, so I waited for her to get back in her SUV, and I parked my van back in its rightful spot and let her out. After that, I called the school and gave them the license plate number. Nothing will probably come of it, but I don't think she'll park in someone's driveway again anytime soon. I'll take the a-hole points because there's a child involved, but you shouldn't put your child in situations like this anyway. The next one is an entitled parent's story. My town has 3 parks. One is small and used to have picnic tables. The second one is fairly bigger and had tennis and basketball courts, but the third one is the biggest and most beautiful one. It has a huge lake with docks for fishing, hiking trails, 2 big beautiful buildings that have been used for a variety of parties and celebrations, and next to that a large playground. An old man started going to the playground and sitting at one of the picnic tables that was under a roof, along with other picnic tables. He would have a sad smile on his face as he watched the kids laughing and having a good time. Unfortunately, some parents became uncomfortable and wanted him to leave. One called the cops, and the cops told them they couldn't do anything since it was a park that was open to everyone. Well, they started posting it online to a local group telling everyone to watch out for this poor man who must be a kidnapping pedophile. They started harassing him to leave. He went to his car and just decided to sit there and keep watching. One parent and I got really angry at the gossip and entitlement going on there and went to go see him. He said that he lost his only grandchild to cancer earlier that year, and his wife died of a broken heart a month later. He was seriously depressed. His son became concerned about him and begged him to come and stay with him and his pregnant wife. So that's what he did. Both his son and daughter-in-law worked during the day and were home by 5 p.m. He didn't have anything to do, so he went exploring and came upon the big park. His mood lifted considerably watching the children and enjoyed hearing their laughter. It brought back fond memories of his grandson being that age and having fun before getting really sick. We urged him out of the car and back to the picnic table, while the other parent went to go tell the others the true story and apparently got into a huge argument about just who is allowed at the park. I told the elderly man of my 2 kids and how he had every right to be there. I had an idea and told the other parent when he came shaking his head at the stupidity of other people thinking that they can say who is and isn't allowed at a public park. I told him to call all of his friends who didn't have kids, and I would call all of mine, and we would all sit there and watch the kids. Well, he decided to also call his grandma, who had recently lost her husband to a massive heart attack, and was grieving as well. About 20 minutes later, they all arrived, and the tension in the other entitled parents went up. The guy introduced his grandma to the old man, and they became like young teenagers, discovering love for the first time. She would whisper something to him, and he would blush and laugh. Then he would whisper something to her, and she would blush and giggle. It was endearing to watch. Time got away from all of us, and the man's son went looking for him and found him surrounded by people. He had been encouraging his dad to find something to do until they could get home. He was happy that he found and made a lot of friends. All of us took turns picking him up, and soon the old grandma as well to take with us on outings. The old man got married to the old grandma, and they spent a blissful 10 years with each other before dying within a few days of each other. Thank you for watching. I would really appreciate it if you could like the video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. We'll see you again tomorrow.